if you don't need it, don't upgrade to it, right? If there's not something specifically in there, that whatever fix or something, just stay on what version you're on.
Hello and welcome to React Native Radio, episode 19. Today, our panelists are Lee Johnson.
How's it going?
Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey, everyone.
Kevin Old.
Hello.
And I'm Nader Dabit. So today our topic is going to be a little different than what we normally do. We don't really have a special guest today, but we kind of decided maybe to go ahead and give our experiences of lessons learned for not only React Native, but also React, because we feel that they kind of are going to correlate to one another. So a lot of us have only been using React or React Native for about a year. So we thought we'd reflect on, I guess, the last year of our work, really. So would anyone like to go ahead and get us started off on kind of a few things that they feel that they've learned that are important?
Yeah, sure. I've got a good one. Probably not immediately upgrading as soon as the next version comes out.
Yes, good one. Very good one.
I've run into so many issues over, not as much anymore, obviously. There's just, it's much more stable now, but back in the day, man, I would probably spend 2 or 3 hours every time a new update came out. And I have no idea why I kept doing that. It was like an addiction, you just kept going. I'm like, fuck, I know I'm going to spend 4 hours on this tonight, but I need the newest version.
I don't know what it does, but I have to have it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's like a feature that I want that I'll never use, but I have to have it just in case.
Yeah. And I need all this to work with the React Native Webpack dev server, which was also very, very alpha at the time. So I put myself through a lot of trouble.
Ever since the stateless components were released with the new version of React, I wanted to upgrade our company's project to the newer version, but just updated a project that I'm working on personally from .12, I think, to .19. So it was a pretty major upgrade. Like everything broke for like the entire day before I got everything working. But after I got everything working, it's just beautiful. I really like the newest version, at least. I think .2 is out right now, right?
Not sure if it is yet or not. I know
Yeah, .20 just came out. Mine just came out 12 days ago, so it's pretty old. They're probably going to have a newer one within the next, within the next day or two. We'll see .21, right? But yeah, .20 is the latest.
Yeah, I definitely do not do the release candidates at all anymore. I tried to do that at first too, and I don't even go there.
Yeah, this page used to be my home page when I was browsing the web, right? Just on Chrome. It was so exciting waiting for all the new releases to come out, but I've definitely calmed down since.
Yeah, it's definitely a very good lesson learned. And I think for me, when to upgrade our corporate one, I'd read through all the versions between to look at the bug fixes and the new features. And really new features, we just haven't come across anything we just have to have for iOS. And Android's a different story, but we're focusing on iOS first. And so we haven't really come across new features. So I really kind of try to look at bugs and see if it's either an issue we've been experiencing or something that could potentially cause problems with what we're using.
Yeah, I'll say the same thing about upgrading. I did a prototype in the fall, and right when I was about to go demo it, I thought, hey, well, let me update to the latest version. I'll get all the good stuff, and it'll probably be faster. And I did that, and I couldn't get it unstuck. Downgrading didn't work, and it wouldn't compile in Xcode. And the biggest lesson learned to me is that just if you don't need it, don't upgrade to it. Right? If there's not something specifically in there, that whatever fix or something, just stay on what version you're on.
I'm sure the Facebook admin somewhere are cringing.
I was going to say, on another topic of lessons learned, it's kind of in both worlds, the React world and in the React Native world. But I think I've seen it more in the React Native world, in that if you keep your components very small and very focused, you can compose them however you need to, and you get more reusability from what you're coding on the server side or just in React, you can reuse a lot of those things in React Native. You may not be able to use the exact component, but there might only be a very minor tweak to it. But for the most part, you should be able to reuse a lot of the components on both React on the server side or client side in a browser and in React Native. Like, for instance, a button. You just have a wrapper component around a button, and then if there's something specific to React Native that you need, you can kind of make that adaptation, adapt that to there, and it should work in both places. So,
yeah, I think that was a big lesson learned for me, was the whole thinking in React component reuse in general. And since I actually came from native mobile. I did not have any of the React web background. Then it wasn't as obvious in React Native. When you're building a small, very focused app, coding for reuse isn't as evident. But since then, we started doing a very large web application in React. And from the get-go, decided to use as much component-based reuse as possible, and it makes a lot more sense on the web side. I think if you have that background first, then you can go into React Native with a good idea of how to really what to put in a component and what not to, and how to structure it and all that. But going straight into React Native, coming from a different background, I guess that was a tricky lesson learned for me, so that our React Native app is really focused, and it does what it does, and I don't foresee needing to share a lot of the stuff that's in it, but it's pretty messy code base compared to how it should be.
Yeah, and just coming into it and not ever having any experience in React Native and trying to compose a very reusable component that has a lot of complex stuff that might be going on in and around it, it just is harder to do if you've never kind of had a little bit of experience. Now that we've had more experience, I feel like it makes a lot more sense. But just starting off, it kind of is harder as a beginner to even understand how to do anything more than just some basic stuff with that anyway, as far as reusability is concerned.
Yeah, and I think just being able to, you mentioned it, Lee, the Thinking in React. We'll put a link in the show notes, but it's the Thinking in React page on the React site. That really is the place to start still. What amazes me is that page has been up for, going on 3 years now, maybe longer than that. And it's still as relevant as when they put it up. Like that's the number one resource I point someone to when they're coming up with either React or React Native, because you have to get in that mindset to where you look at an interface and you break it down into all of these components, and then you group the reusable components, and things like lists and tables are the easy ones to see. But, a lot of the times, and I mean, buttons are probably the same. It's easy to say, okay, well, I can reuse this button component everywhere. But then when you get into like sets of data where you've got a tabular interface with a set of buttons below it, that is a common component that's composed of other components. So, I mean, that grouping of components can also be another common shareable piece.
Yeah, that Thinking React, I mean, I go back to it regularly, honestly. I go back to that page anytime I'm a little unsure of where to draw the line, right? Because you don't want to get too micro component based, because if your app's large, then you're just going to be swimming in tiny components and not find anything. But you don't want to get too complex, because you're losing most of the benefit of using something like React. If you have it humongous, page views with the code in it, I mean, you're not getting the benefit of the reuse or the component or any of the technology. So I have to go back there regularly just to kind of rethink whatever I'm working on, reread, and kind of look at that Thinking of React page again and see if it kind of helps me decide.
I would say one thing that I've really learned, I guess, is going to rnplay.org. I guess ever since they've been out, going to rnplay.org, and kind of just anytime I have a question about whether or not something would theoretically work, you can kind of just go up there and spin up a new React Native project on the fly and just start playing around with it. It's like a really good resource to go and just just do whatever you want without having to invest in creating a new project on your computer and going through all the npm install and all that stuff. And then you can just junk it when you're done with it, delete it. And then also there's just a ton of projects that are already there that you can kind of open and dig into and change things and see, what this does if you do this. I would say the animation stuff on there is mainly what I've gotten out of it. There's also routing and a million examples on there, but some of the animation stuff on there is really neat to look at and play with and just mess around with and see what happens.
Yeah, art and play has been pretty cool, especially when Brent or Brownie Fed post something. They always have a bunch of really cool stuff on artandplay.org.
And I think it was down maybe for a few days last week, but it seems to be working perfectly now. And it looks like they may have upgraded the component thing that runs the app in the phone, because it looks a little different now, but it works a lot better. So if you went there and it wasn't working before, it should be working now.
So Kevin, you had mentioned in the component and reuse kind of the web versus React Native reuse. Is that something you guys try to do, or?
Absolutely. On the website, we build with maximum reuse in mind. For instance, we're using Jed's Select React component, React Select, and we actually wrap that component with our own Select. So we use his inside of it, but we have custom things that we get with data and format it the right way and so forth. But the idea is that we're building a Select that can be used everywhere throughout our app, and no one will ever have to touch it. They just simply implement it. The same with the buttons. We make it so that the props are kind of the main driver in the component. So we have a couple of pieces of logic in there that will determine if additional class names are passed. And then we use higher order functions quite a bit to aid in that reusability, rather than coding a component. You can have 20 button components, like a success button and a cancel button, something like that, right? And coding the logic inside that component. I guess that's one thing to point out when I'm saying reusability. I'm not only talking about just the UI itself, but the functionality. So higher order functions, if you're not working with those, you're missing a huge piece of the reusable nature of React. And so I encourage you to dig into that, because you can have functionality applied to a certain button, and they're all using the same component underneath, but the actual action that's fired as a result is handled via a higher order function that's passed into that component.
Hey, Kevin, so I know you mentioned a bunch of different types of buttons that you have, like success and error buttons. Do you use higher order components and functions to sideways load features like React Native, or, like the logic for React Native, for the component to figure out whether it should render a div or a view? Or do you maybe have a base button class that you extend? How do you guys kind of put all that together?
Yeah, so it's mainly a base button class, and when I say that we could have multiple types of buttons, it just depends. On the web, HTML, CSS kind of work together to build the UI that you're viewing. And sometimes we have been working with some legacy code, which we're slowly but surely getting away from. But sometimes the markup is tied to styling. And so we had to code a couple of different component variations of the button component and then glue those together. What was really neat was early on in this project, we had to get creative and code various versions of these buttons and components that would be used in the buttons. So, and when I said error button earlier, I meant like a delete button. So a success button, to where if you want to submit a form, has a color of green, and a delete button is red. And so obviously those are using the same base component, and you pass a different class into it. Those two didn't differ in markup, but what did differ was like an icon button. So that would be a button that has an icon on it and some text. And earlier in the summer, we were still on the legacy markup, and we literally just had to come up with a way to kind of glue all of that together. So we made an icon component, and then we made an icon text component that would extend and include that icon component if the user passed a class that had icon in the thing. So we had to make these things kind of build off of each other and refer to the props when they because we weren't going to put we weren't going to like extend. I mean, we could have added the class for an icon, but we wanted to implement the icon component. So we kind of, I don't know, what was neat was that we could do it. We were able to kind of unify that into more streamlined buttons with a new UI, new markup. So we were able to move away from that. But we were able to, the point I'm trying to make is that we were able to go into an existing interface that didn't have the exact structure that it should from a cascading style sheets and markup perspective, and build the React components that we needed, allow those to work together, and then render the appropriate UI. But taking that onto the React Native side, so ideally what we want to do, and we've actually put React Native down at work for a while, just until we get the web to a certain point to where we're not moving things around as much, which we're closing in on that pretty quickly. But I view interacting with a button component on the web the same as what I would use on React Native. So I'm hoping to share that code, and if we have a need in React Native to for additional props, we could add those. I don't know. I'm trying to limit the number of components that we have to re-implement. I think it'll be very small overall, because our initial deep dive into that React Native exploration, we were able to reuse the majority of logic. We did have to rewrite components that were like the overall form, right, and the list view and things like that needed to do something different than what the web did. But I'm trying to keep all of those small components, button or a text input. We have a text input that's on our, that wraps like an input. And what I would love to do is reuse that component on React Native and just kind of retrofit it for whatever we need to pass to React Native's version. So it makes sense.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. Have you guys considered doing like the React Native versus React Logic using Webpack, like at build time, where you kind of Webpack will figure out which environment you're in, and then based on that you could only include like the React Native stuff or only include the web stuff.
I've not played with that at all. Have you used that?
Yeah, but only on the web. I'll take advantage of like Webpack's like build step. I call it build time. So basically to hard code a lot of different APIs, for development versus production. So you won't see the actual logic for if development or if production.
Yes. I use those as well. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I use those primarily in Redux when I'm configuring the store to kind of switch out if I want the store to be a development store that has a logger, or if it's the production version of the Redux store. I use those conditional blocks, those Webpack conditional blocks, in a few places. But I've not. I don't know. I know what you're talking about now, and I went down that area of exploration mentally, and then I thought, no, that's going to add too much complexity for what we're trying to do. We're really just producing a bundle right now on the web, and I would like to break that out into a common bundle, a true common bundle that has, or let me say a common components bundle and then, our app itself. So the common components is what I view, kind of reused among other web applications. So like your buttons and tables and, form elements and form and all of those things, headers, whatever kind of components are very generic. And then all the app specific bundle is what would be reloaded on various pages. So yeah, that's as far as I've gone with Webpack and splitting things out and conditionally loading things.
Okay, I gotcha.
Are there other strategies any of you use that apply to kind of lessons learned with React or React Native?
I don't know if this is just me sort of becoming a better developer or not, but being much more skeptical of what I use and running through like the code on GitHub before actually using a package. I've shot myself in the foot so many times relying on someone else's code, which I, 100% appreciate having it there, but then realizing like something isn't covered and then like going through the process of opening up a pull request and, taking care of things as well as I can. But I feel like I've been in so many situations where I could have just done a little bit more research and figured it out on my own, but used a package instead that, didn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one because we had an example of that where we were using a package for some kind of UI thing, and the package was pulled, which I didn't know you could pull a package from NPM like that. It just wasn't there anymore. We were pretty far into the application, and it just ceased to exist for some copyright reasons. Which is kind of strange. And, it wouldn't have taken much to just really dive in and build it, because it wasn't a huge component, just to build it for ourselves. But we were just kind of in a hurry and grabbed something and didn't really look deep enough into it like you're talking about. And it got pulled. We had to find something else. So it's definitely good to do your homework, like you said.
Yeah, I'll also jump in here with a lesson learned on the React side with taking something to production. And then this also kind of speaks to what we were talking about with React Native and kind of locking your dependencies down or not upgrading before you're ready. NPM shrink wrap is something everyone is using.
100%.
Yes. We have been bit by, when we're deploying, we're catching this in QA. But we're deploying to a lot of QA servers, and these were some kind of automated deploys. Well, they weren't really automated. They were just other QA members were deploying them, and they were running into an issue where they couldn't deploy it. And once I was able to get down in the details, it couldn't find a certain version of a package, or something conflicted, or I don't know, something really weird. And what it resulted in was that something needed to be upgraded. And a dependency of something else wasn't happy that thing was being upgraded, and so forth. So running NPM shrink wrap will produce a NPM shrink wrap JSON that you check in alongside your NPM or your package JSON. When your node environment is in production, is equal to production, then it will only install what's on that NPM shrink wrap. The only caveat to that is if you need to shrink wrap your dev dependencies, you have to add the dev flag to the NPM shrink wrap command, because by default, it only shrink wraps the dependencies block. And then also the other piece on that I've learned through Pain is that NPM 3 is what we really should be using now. The whole shrink wrap process works a lot better with that. I said that was the last lesson on that topic, but there is one more in that when you're doing an NPM shrink wrap, so I ran into an issue when I was with NPM shrink wrap initially, and that my NPM shrink wrap, it had a URL to a mirror of the NPM registry instead of .npmjs.org. And I thought it was the weirdest thing. I don't know how that registry got in there, but that turned out to be the ultimate problem with one of the issues we found when deploying to our QA servers. And what I was able to determine was that my installation of npm in the cache was somehow holding on to that registry. And the fix was to run npm cache clean. And sure enough, as soon as I ran npm cache clean, it was better, but there was still an issue with the npm shrink wrap. And so what I ended up doing was I completely uninstalled Node, and I used NVM to install my Node version. So it actually went really quick. And then once I ran npm shrink wrap, and I even had the registry property set to registry.npmjs.org in my npmrc file, and it wasn't honoring that. But anyway, once I reinstalled Node, I didn't have any other issues with that. So just maybe an obvious note, but it took me days to figure it out what was going on. npm cache clean and reinstalling versions of Node. So if you switch to another version of Node on your machine, if something's not working right, that's still extremely valid at the point where we're at with Node and npm and the dependencies of all these packages. It really is kind of we're still at that early iteration, even though Node's several years, almost 5 years old. So those are my two things about npm shrink wrap.
Yeah, I will also throw in there, if you're having issues and you cannot figure it out, a lot of times just deleting your Node modules and running npm install again will fix it if it's as a last resort. I'm not sure if any of you guys have run into that too, but that seems to have come in handy a few times.
Yeah, actually, when we generate our npm shrink wrap, we're in a Rails environment, and I have a rake task that does it instead of requiring people to do these steps in npm. So I literally do a remove of the Node modules directory. I do a fresh npm install. I delete the npm shrink wrap, and then have it write all of that out. So definitely delete that directory. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my first resort. If anything doesn't act the way I think it should, that's the first thing I do.
I threw in a npm run clean script into my stuff where rmrf node modules, npm cache clean with the force flag, npm install, and then npm start.
I don't know if you guys are working with any custom bridges as far as React Native goes, but we've built a few things in our company. I think we've done about 2 now that are custom components that we basically bridged, I guess, into iOS. And when you're checking that stuff into GitHub, we've had quite a few issues with that. I don't really know what the lesson learned here would be on that. I guess if there's any way around doing that, if you're working on a large team, try to make the least amount of changes to your actual Xcode project and your pods and all that stuff, because we have people downloading the different versions from GitHub, so everything looks fine and it all comes down fine, but it'll just throw these random errors, and that's usually the issue.
Yeah, and Xcode projects are notoriously a pain for that. We used to have lots of trouble with interface builder files because they're big XML files and the order's not maintained. But the pods, and that's one of the issues we had that Nader's talking about, is not only do we have a custom bridge, but that custom bridge was talking to a pod that was installed through CocoaPods. So all those things kind of have to be there to fit, and the pods can get corrupt because one user checked in their lock file and then another user accidentally checked it out, and you don't have access anymore because it's not the same user.
So, Kevin, how big is the team that you guys have working on the React project at your company?
For the most part, there's been 3 of us that have developed most of the functionality, and we have 2 new members of the team that we're giving smaller pieces. And what's awesome is that they've been able to come up to speed really quickly, but just following the patterns that we've established so far with the components, with Redux, and with the data flow of how we get data in and out of or into the components, and then the testing. So yeah, we're at 5 at the moment. I think we're getting to a point where we will be 5 kind of going forward, but people still kind of hop off onto other projects as needed. So at the minimum, there's 2 of us working on it at any given time, up to 5.
Okay, I was just kind of curious how you guys have felt working together, on a React project, if that's worked out really well as a team, or if you've had any experiences with like an MVC framework, for example, to kind of compare the two. Yeah,
so it actually does work out really well for teams. It's like any other piece of software that you have to make sure you're not having the same effort toward the same component, or you're not stepping on each other's toes. We've done some bigger features. The 3 of us that were on, we did each one of us did bigger features over the past 2 months. And when we've merged things together, we had a few conflicts, but for the most part, everything just kind of fit together. And in comparison to what I've worked on in the past related to MVC, it's much easier to deal with. You're really able to test things that you would never have tested before. I'm trying to think of an example, but I mean, any of the backbone code, I mean, you can't test it to near the level that you can here. So that builds a lot of confidence in having numerous people work on the same code. And then what's really cool about React is that when you walk into someone else's code, you know where everything is. There's like 3 things you need to know. Like, I mean, what a component looks like, where the data is coming from. And in our case, we use Redux and we pass it all the way down from the top of the application. And that's it, right? In other apps, you had to go find the template, and then you had to go find what was querying the template, where it was getting the data, and what events were firing. I mean, it was just chaos. So this is actually a huge breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I would say coming from Angular, the fact that I no longer have to look at a directive ever again for a while at least is pretty great.
Right. Yeah, same here. I never worked with, I inherited some Angular stuff, but I was solely on that Angular piece. So I never had moving code, with other people on an Angular project, but I could imagine that would have gotten really, really nightmarish, like really quickly.
And so I think that you touched on it just now, but I think a huge lesson learned involves going from the MVC mindset to a Flux type architecture. That's been one of the biggest hurdles and biggest things to take with you, just because it's so different. It's a different way of thinking about it. I think you can grasp the component idea, the thinking React, pretty quickly. You at least understand what it's trying to do, and it takes you a little trial and error to get it right. But the Flux architecture is just a very different beast from what we're used to. So I think understanding that and trying, like we did vanilla Flux, and we did a Reflux and a Redux, and there's different things we tried to see what worked. And sometimes you can implement it really sloppily and have some messy state going on if you don't really understand what you're doing to begin with. If you just jumped in there and ran with Reflux and didn't really know what it was doing, it can get very messy. So what do you guys, I guess, what can you share as far as that goes, as far as Flux implementations? Really not routing, because routing is kind of a different thing, really more of the Flux and the data.
I agree with you. We had a lot of issues with that as well. I mean, on the React side, we had 4 or 5 different things, and we're still struggling to bring that up to date with our current stack, the alt stack that we decided to go with. And just for myself too, personally, when I dove into React Native, I still wasn't very familiar with Flux and how that all worked. And I guess I was just like driving myself crazy, telling myself that I'm smart and I'll figure it out, but it was just so many things at once. I think I should have told myself that it's totally okay to, like learn one thing at a time and use jQuery and, the Ajax method rather than, trying to get Flux in with Super Agent and building an XHR library, or even learning how the new Fetch API works, right? Like there were some weird intricacies about that too,
Yeah, I'll agree with you that Redux has changed the game for me. I was working with Flux, and I had excellent success with Flux, enough so that any of the implementations of Flux, so Marty or Reflux or any of those that came after that, they never had enough for me to switch. And once I saw a little bit of complexity with the number of components that we had, and at the time I think it was about 30 components, and we had a number of stores, so we were up to about 8 to 10 stores. We had a bunch of listeners, and our component did mount and component did update we were fetching data from those stores. It started to occur to me that was a level of complexity that I wasn't really prepared for. I got that because I was trying to test those. So testing the stores was pretty challenging. And so once I saw the talk that Dan Abramov gave, I was just overwhelmed with the flashy, hot module reloading on steroids and time travel and all that. And then I got to thinking about the single state, and I thought, you know what, that's exactly what I'd like to have, because right now I've got multiple states whether I want it or not, because there's not really a way to enforce what I want to do. I've got an edit row that's going to go fetch what it needs from this store, and I've got a button that's going to go fetch something. That's a bad example. I don't know. I had all these components that could go fetch or that would get data from the various stores. So it was hard to even mock that. How do you mock all of those different sets of states? And of course that occurred to me when I was trying to test it. Not to mention that testing the Flux store was a bit of a kind of acrobatics. We had to mock. I had to end up using, I can't remember what it is, but I had to essentially stub some functions, and then I had to reach into to a function. I can't remember what this NPM module was, but it allowed you to reach inside of a component or a class, and I guess get that method out of there. So basically I got my state changing method. I was able to get that out of the component and then use it in the test. But I had a before each that was, at the top of these tests that was not the easiest to follow, but it ended up working. But so there was just so much complexity there. And then when Redux came along and I got the idea that we've got a single state that's passed from the top, everything clicked. And so I've been using that ever since. And I don't know if there's anything that can take me away from that, because it's just I don't have to worry about where the data is coming from and if the data is up to date. I simply don't have to worry about that. If my reducer composition is working and if my reducer methods pass, then the data that I get is going to be up to date. I can't say enough good things about Redux.
I think that's a good topic right here, something for us to kind of go over. I'm kind of curious, do you think that Redux is going to hold its own for a while and maybe be the kind of long-term solution for data management? Or do you think that something like Relay and GraphQL, I know you've worked with GraphQL some, do you think that one of those or that combination or something else may come along? Or do you really feel like Redux has like a long-term path, I guess, with React and React Native? I know that's kind of a hard question to definitively answer, but maybe just your opinion about that, I guess.
Yeah, I actually have I have some. I mean, I know what's going to work for me long term, and actually, so I think both have a state, a place in the game. Redux is going to live on, and Redux is going to live on for those long-lived web applications. So things like the thing I'm building with an expense report manager, and if you have a set of admin utilities that may allow the user to build a set of form fields. So if they're building, a form and they're dragging and dropping things and they're saying, well, this is a drop down and it's got these values, that's long-lived state. You're likely not going to go back to the server after every little piece of data is changed, like in the relay style, and save that up there because it might degrade the user experience. So I guess the best way to say it is that if the user experience doesn't allow for latency, then you're most likely going to want to use Redux because that'll give you the long-lived state management in the page. And when I say long-lived, even seconds are considered long-lived, in my opinion. Relay, I think, solves a different problem. I see that if you need to get the exact set of data and you need to get all of that and bring it down at one time, and then you also don't have as much state to manage between the components. So if your components aren't necessarily interacting with each other, if they're just simply displaying data, I think that's the perfect use case for Relay. And then, of course, Relay works with GraphQL. And so that together, you're able to literally get the data from multiple sources, essentially, and then provide it in the unified shape of data that your client needs. And then Relay will get that down to the proper components. So you're able to keep the query close to the component or in the component and simply display data. So I view it more as for like these applications that need to display a lot of data versus to manage the data for a long-lived time on the page. On the topic of GraphQL, I do think that there's going to be, I know I'm playing with it as a replacement for any kind of REST server that I'm working with. Rather than implementing multiple endpoints to get the data I need, I think it's extremely valuable to have that shape of JSON that you can define in a query and then use whatever you want to send an AJAX call with that query and then get that shape of data back. That's powerful whether you're using Relay or not. So I am actively exploring just using GraphQL by itself to replace multiple endpoints.
Yeah, and I think we're doing something similar. We have a JSON data fetching type, GraphQL type service that's homegrown, but you define the data and you get it back populated. And I think where we differentiate is things like user data, and especially a web application. That is something that would be at the state level in like a Redux thing, but our pages display certain data per page with lots of different containers and stuff, and that's where you use the kind of the Relay fetching, get the data and show it here. But this unique group of data probably won't be shown anywhere else, and then store the settings and the user, the really persistent things in the Redux store.
Yeah, I think GraphQL over the next year is gonna work. I mean, I think it's gonna be a companion to Relay, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be under the umbrella of Relay. I think these use cases to where we're taking, the various bits of various databases and services, microservices, and kind of gluing them together with a GraphQL endpoint. I think that we're going to see a lot more of that. I know I'm certainly using that, and there may be a little bit of latency if you have to, implement your resolve function with a promise, but simply having all of the data you need in a single request is, I don't know, I don't think the impact of that has been realized once you're able to really play around with it. And I've actually implemented, I'm prototyping But we currently have a lot of overfetching of data that we do with our expense report application, and simply putting GraphQL into the Ruby implementation and taking the same active record queries that are made and putting those in the GraphQL types, I'm able to get exactly the shape of data that I need for the client that I'm implementing, which in this case it's a browser, but it may be our mobile client. And all I'm doing is changing the query on the client. That's huge. It's absolutely huge because requirements change. We may want 10 fields today, and tomorrow we need 20 fields. And we don't have to implement new endpoints. We can simply extend the GraphQL types. And there wasn't really any code change that I had to do on any of our models or any of our application code. I literally just wrote the GraphQL object types, defined the fields in the resolve function, told it where to go get it, and it was able to go get the data and bring it back in the exact shape that I needed it on that request. I think we're going to see a lot of implementations like that where companies are able to, they may still have separate data sources, but they'll unify them with GraphQL.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something for us to keep an eye on and kind of just see. We have so much churn and so much new stuff coming out all the time. It's always exciting to see people come up with new inventive ways and companies coming up with their own solutions to all of the issues as far as data management. So who knows, there might be another Redux killer that comes out in the next year, or Redux may continue to improve and they end up being like the go-to long-term solution. So I guess we'll just have to see. So
I will add one thing, and it's just something I've got in the back of my mind. I have no knowledge of this, but I'm wondering if there will possibly be a extension of Redux into Relay. I don't know. I think Redux was already out there and people were using it right when Relay came out from Facebook, 6 or 8 months ago now. So now that the two of them have been out for, I guess, 9 months or so collectively, right? I think experimentation is going to happen, and there may be a solution to having the best of Relay and the best of Redux in the same thing. So I certainly hope for that. And if it's not too far from what we're used to with Relay, with Redux. So I guess it would give you a choice, right? So you've got one state that can be long-lived, but then if you define your query inside the component, it will use kind of the relay mechanism. I don't know if that's possible or a good idea. I don't know. I think there's going to be some experimentation there, though.
I would say one thing in general that I've learned is not to get too used to doing anything one certain way and continue reading the docs and kind of keeping your options open and just understanding that the API changes so much and new things come out and new ways of doing things, and kind of, going back and rethinking some of the stuff that you've done. I know that's, I guess, the case in anything, but in particular with React Native. And another thing is, I guess, really spending a lot of time understanding ES6 will make your life a lot easier. I'm really enjoying using a lot of the ES6 features that you can't really use without a transpiler. And I guess I'm a big fan of destructuring now, and I'm a big fan of the fat arrow functions. And in particular, it's made everything a lot cleaner.
Yeah, I'll second the ES6 recommendation. I was a late adopter. It was midsummer before I was really adopting it, and it was because I was trying not to. I was trying to keep the JavaScript that people on my team knew, instead of throwing React and Redux and all the things that are in that. In addition to ripping the language out from underneath them. But it really has helped us once we've started adopting it. It's just helped a lot. And we don't use a ton of the features, but we do use we we kind of talked as a team and said, okay, well, what are the few things that we want to adopt? And there were some givens like the import statements and being able to choose what functions we import. That's big, because it's not only from I'm certain from a low level implementation that you're only importing what you're going to use, but then also from a readability standpoint, when you open the file, you know that this function is coming from this particular thing. So also the let, we use that, and we use some of the inline templates with the little backticks. That's pretty big. The other thing I wanted to respond to is on your observation of, kind of stay with what, keep up to date with things, and, read the docs, and, be open to another way of doing it. I certainly agree with that. I'll also add one thing, in that you kind of set some defaults that make some decisions of what you're happy with. So what about your stack do you like, and what are you willing to give up, or what do you know very well and you're going to continue using that? So I use Immutable.js, and with it I get the ability to have my data as immutable on the page, and I get utility functions that I'd normally have to load Lodash or underscore to get. So it's just a huge win, and something I'm not willing to give up. But my encouragement is just to have those things that you're that are in your tool belt that you're using, and that you only give up once something else proves itself to be far superior to what you're currently doing.
Absolutely. Can you give maybe an example of, or anyone, Peter or Lee, maybe of a feature that did come out recently with either React or React Native that you just had to use that would maybe throw off your existing style that you have throughout your application?
Oh, man. Stateless components for sure. And forgetting to put import React from React at the top of the document for those. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but stateless components, I always forgot to put import React from React. And I know with Webpack 2, you can basically use the provide plugin and inject, the React dependency across all your files. But for some reason, I've avoided doing that only because of these files. I don't know why. I feel like I should just go down the Webpack route and use the provide plugin, but I just haven't yet. What do you guys think about that?
So I've heard about the provide plugin, but I've never used it. So you're saying you can basically set up a certain component to be injected in all of your views or certain views, or how does that work?
So basically with the provide plugin, instead of doing import React from React in your files, you can completely remove that line and Webpack will automatically import it for you. At work, I did this with React, React DOM, or no, not React DOM, React Lodash, class names, the Jed Watson library, because we use that a lot, and something else. And in any case, you don't have to import those files into your project anymore. I haven't done this on my personal projects though, but I think that's because I am not using stateless components at work yet.
Okay, cool. Is there anything else that you guys want to go over before we wrap it up? I guess we'll get to our picks. So Lee, do you have any picks tonight?
Yeah, I think my pick's going to be React Native Desktop. It's a library where you can create OS X desktop applications using all the React Native tooling and components.
Cool. And I guess that will actually be a good lead into a question that we received from a listener. Do you think React Native can come to the desktop and replace technologies like Electron? I know this is kind of not in our general discussion, but I figured I was going to kind of put it after the picks, but since the pick kind of related to that, maybe we can discuss that just really quickly if anyone wants to jump on that question.
Well, it seems to, in my opinion, be exactly what my pick is for. React Native Desktop does what Electron does for React Web application for React Native, but it uses the React Native, and it actually is built on top of the React Native code with the added wrapper for the desktop. So my answer to that question would be yes, check out React Native Desktop.
Cool. Yeah, I +1 that. I think the more that you can stick to one way of doing things, the better. And if you're already using React and you can jump into React Native or React Desktop and kind of keep your head in the same, I guess, mind state or whatever, it definitely would make sense at least. Electron is awesome though, so I would look into both of them. But if you're already using React, check out React Native Desktop.
But just to add on that too, you could use React with Electron and make your app cross-platform.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, that's what it does. It runs your React application in a desktop wrapper, like Slack has actually an Electron, or maybe in one, but it's a wrapped application. But was the question related specifically to React Native, and that's exactly what React Native Desktop does.
Okay, cool. So, Peter, would you like to go with the pick?
Yeah, sure. So, Deco Software, I think that's how you pronounce them, DECO software.com, is building a React Native IDE. It looks and kind of feels like Sketch, but you can use like a GUI to style your React components. I think it's a great tool for designers or people just getting started with React Native that may not understand, Webpack and all these fun things. This is kind of a wrapper for all that and a nice GUI. Absolutely.
And we're going to be having the developers from Deco Software on our show. And I think that episode is going to air on April 4th, I believe. We're not recording it until the end of March. So if you're interested in that, kind of keep an eye on our show and listen once they're on. I think that should be a cool show. Kevin, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I'm picking a utility that's been released this week called React Native AWS Signature. And what it does is provide you with the ability to generate AWS signatures for any of the sign calls that you need to the normal AWS services from React Native. The reason this is needed is because currently React Native port the AWS SDK JS. So it's necessary if you're going to communicate with those, any of the EC2 instances or Dynamo or any of those AWS services to generate a signature for your request using the guidelines that AWS has put out, which normally is taken care of by the AWS SDK JS.
So Forward.js is my pick. I just came back from Forward.js. It's my first time going there. I used to go to JSConf, which is down in Florida. It's one of my favorite conferences, but it's kind of been put on hold, maybe discontinued. So this year I went to Forward.js, and it was really great. It was only actually one day of conference, and then they have like 5 days of workshops. But the quality of the workshops were just fantastic, and the speakers at the actual conference were as well. So, and it's a very inexpensive conference too. So it's a nice change from what I'm used to from JSConf, which was also a great conference, but just a little different. So yeah, if you're looking for something to do and a conference to go to, look at Forward.js. I think there's 2 of them per year. I think they happen every 6 months. So we have one last question from a listener. The question is, with React Native, do you use a transpiler like TypeScript or CoffeeScript, or do you just use plain JS?
Babel for the win.
Yeah, well, it comes built in with that. I actually tried to set up TypeScript because I really like TypeScript. And it was just too much. It was kind of, like Kevin mentioned earlier, throwing too much at yourself, or Peter mentioned that earlier too. Just doing too much at once. It was too much at once to try to tackle new technology and throw something like TypeScript into this new technology that already has a different layout and structure. So just using the Babel that now comes with it is all we use.
There's also an Elm implementation that someone made for React Native too.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I'm staying away from that. Like, if I do that, I'm really going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so I've never used anything but just the initial install of React Native. So I've not customized React Native in any way. I'm hopeful that once the build tools are a little more in line with what we're used to with React Native or with React on the desktop or on the website, that the ability to customize and use whatever build tools we want. Once that's a little easier to interface with, then I don't necessarily know that I would use TypeScript or CoffeeScript or anything like that. I would just always want to make sure that Babel's there, because I depend on that these days.
Okay, great. Well, I think that wraps up episode 19 of React Native Radio. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.